Alright, so who's ready to talk Deadpool and Wolverine? Without spoilers, of course. Let's go! When his homeworld faces an existential threat, Wade Wilson must suit up again to convince a reluctant Wolverine to help out. So, to reiterate, I'm going to be very vague about certain aspects so that I can avoid spoiling the story and any surprises. Now, this is just as you'd expect from a Deadpool movie. There are fourth wall breaks, an immense amount of violence, and then a tremendous volume of profanity. The action, it is wonderfully crafted and it's captured. And more often than not, we've got longer takes that allow us to witness the choreography and really get immersed into the fights. There are many times where quick cuts are used also, but the mix, I think, is pretty balanced. And outside of one or two sequences, I didn't feel like anything was being obscured or hard to see. I mean, the very few times that did happen, the action was taking place in very close and cramped spaces, or there was such a melee going on that the sheer number of bodies involved in the conflict just made it more difficult to discern all of the movements. And even in these instances, there was still a crazy amount of energy that was captured. I mean, it just kept the adrenaline pumping, just like severed arteries of many of Deadpool's foes. Now, Ryan Reynolds is doing his signature shtick, where he's sarcastically snarky, full of wit, and great comedic timing. And while this can become tiresome outside of a Deadpool movie, for this character, the irreverence, it works perfectly to establish and then maintain the story's tone. But he's also able to capture some heart within the character. We got to see some mournful anger within Deadpool 2 when it came to Vanessa, but in this film, we see a more defeatist look at Wade. Part of the storyline involves his outlook on the world and where he sees himself in it. Now, of course, these allow for some funny bits and arcs, but for me, what made these areas better was the inclusion of the drama and the seriousness. These enhanced the comedy and then made the story motivation stronger. I was actually surprised at the amount of emotional weight and pull that the overlying storylines were able to just conjure up. And some I think is inherent in superhero movies, where you have peril that's assumed. But because we're dealing with characters that have a really difficult time dying, it was less about the peril and more about the journey and why it was even taking place in the first place. Now, it's great to see Hugh Jackman back as the Wolverine. Yeah, I mean, I know he died in Logan, and all of that does have explanation on how he's able to appear in this story. Now, off-screen, I love the playful rivalry that Jackman and Reynolds have with each other. And it appears that they're genuine friends, and I think that enables them to create phenomenal antagonistic chemistry. They're frenemies with some bromance thrown in. And the banter and the interactions between the two, I thought it was humorous, it's also violent, and then visually engaging. Now, at times, the back and forth, it can become a bit rote, but the seriousness of Wolverine tones down the snarkiness of Deadpool to then create somewhat balanced exchanges. So with all of the fighting and violence, there are noticeable times, and more than I'd expected, when that gore and blood splatter, it's very obviously CGI. And it's not great CGI. There is a scene towards the final act when a lot of blood is being showcased, and it was very evident that none of it was practical. It actually stood out to me at how fake and computer generated it came across. Now, some was in the shading and the texture, but also just the behavior of a spurt that just wasn't convincing. And this isn't the only time. I mean, there just happened to be an extended sequence where the technique was used for minutes on end. And through every wound and splatter, it just became less and less convincing. And there are also moments when it's painfully obvious that a green screen was in effect. Now, sometimes it looked almost like these were reshoots, and so the camera would then focus in more closely on a subject just to help draw attention away from the recreated background. And at different times throughout the film, there are small, and then even sometimes huge instances that look incredibly fake. And in each of those, even if they were short scenes, they broke me out of the illusion of that location. Now for our villain, I have some questions on timing and then the way things work when it comes to physical characteristics. I know it's kind of dumb to try and apply logic to superhero stories, but this area, it made the baddie less believable. And I appreciate the performance. Emma Corrin is spectacularly cruel and devoid of just mercy. It's wonderful to have a foe who is callous and then has zero regard for others. It makes her morally repugnant, but also then a real threat, rather than somebody who spouts big talk and then waffles when it comes to actions. I would have liked to have seen more development on her, but for what we get, she is given enough screen time to establish her power and ferocity along with her motivation. Now for me, I only saw the initial teaser trailer, so I don't know what reveals were shown in all of the others. But with that, I was happy at the surprises that the story introduced. I mean, some is fan service. That's not a bad thing at all. Fans of the franchise, I mean, they should be rewarded and then given certain visual and story goodies that people who haven't read the comics or seen every single piece of content that features the characters, and they won't pick up on that. But then they have tremendous meaning for those that have done all that. And even though I haven't read any of the comics or seen every show that could contain Deadpool or Wolverine, I still got excited at what the movie delivers. There are some questions that arise as a result of these surprises, but that discussion, it's going to have to wait for another time. Now, for the overall story, it does have holes and some convoluted areas that are kind of inherent now with all of the convergence of the Fox and Marvel properties. And because we saw in the teaser trailer that the TVA from Loki is also involved, meaning that there is a multiverse-esque component, I mean, these get messy all on their own. I think the story stays as streamlined and straightforward as it can. I just would have liked a little bit more explanation on a couple of key areas that influence the plot almost from the start. I was still satisfied with where the story leads, and I think it makes good progress in trying to sort out the whole multiverse mess, but there are just some plot conveniences and character armor to help progress the story along, with the hopes that the surprises and fun of the film is going to distract from some of the problematic areas that the story creates. The film also suffers at times from an overpacked story, and there's a ton going on. And while it does all tie together eventually, some moments feel like they're included just so the audience doesn't go, hey, what about... So overall, despite some very wonky CGI and messy story holes, Deadpool and Wolverine delivers wit, laughs, dismemberment, engaging fight choreography, and a captivating experience, all in an irreverent package that pays respect to both franchises while also eviscerating their corporate entities. Reynolds and Jackman are naturals together, solidly cementing their characters so that no one else could convincingly take their place. The camaraderie and heart the characters share is emotionally resonant, creating a tone for the narrative that can make you want to clap and cheer while also tearing up. Now, there's also a post-credit scene, so make sure you stay to the very end. There is no sex or nudity. There is, though, a lot of sexual innuendo and language, and then almost non-stop profanity and violence. I give Deadpool and Wolverine 4.5 out of 5 couches. I mean, despite the shortcomings that this had, I still had an absolute blast while watching, and I hope you do as well. Now, if you could insert a character into this movie, who would you want to see? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.